In the chill dawn of January 28, 1547, the Palace of Whitehall in London buzzed with whispers and hurried footsteps. Courtiers, draped in velvet cloaks and wearing tense expressions, moved like shadows across a stage where the life of one of England's most formidable kings was drawing to a close. Henry VIII, the colossus who had reshaped English history with an iron fist and an insatiable appetite for power as much as for meat pies, lay in his bedchamber, trapped in a body that seemed to have turned against him. His death was not a sudden curtain fall but a slow, grotesque spectacle, a Shakespearean tragedy before Shakespeare was even born. To understand the ghastly demise of Henry VIII, one must unravel the threads of a life marked by excess, injury, and decisions that left a kingdom reeling and a body on the brink of collapse. In his youth, Henry VIII had been the envy of Europe. Tall, athletic, with a golden mane that practically shouted, "Behold your king!" He was the archetype of a Renaissance monarch. He hunted, jousted, played the lute, and penned poetry, though, let's be honest, he wasn't exactly challenging Petrarch. He dominated tournaments as if born with a lance in hand. But time, that relentless foe that spares no crown, began to exact its toll. By his later years, the Henry who had once dazzled European courts was a bloated shadow of himself, a man imprisoned in a body that resembled a crumbling fortress more than a regal temple. The beginning of the end, if we're to wax poetic, came in 1536 during a jousting tournament at Greenwich. Henry, ever eager to prove he was still England's lion, insisted on competing despite being in his mid-40s, an age when most men would prefer sipping mead by the fire. His horse, likely as exasperated by royal whims as the rest of the kingdom, reared, and the king crashed to the ground with a thud that must have echoed to France. The armor, heavier than a small cart, didn't help. Henry lay unconscious for 2 hours, and though he awoke, the gash on his leg, never properly healed, became the prelude to his downfall. That venous ulcer, treated with a mix of blind optimism and remedies we'd now call witchcraft, became a constant in his life. The wound festered, oozed, and, according to court gossip, emitted a stench that made even the most loyal courtiers wince. The ulcer wasn't just a physical ailment, it was a nagging reminder of Henry's mortality. In an era where hygiene was more aspiration than practice, the wound became a magnet for infections. Royal physicians, with their black robes and know-it-all airs, slathered on ointments likely laced with more lead than healing, occasionally resorting to cauterizing the wound with hot irons. Picture the scene. The king bellowing curses that would make a sailor blush while a trembling physician tried not to overcook the royal leg. These treatments were not only agonizing but futile. The ulcer became an inseparable companion, a testament that even kings cannot escape the frailties of flesh. But the leg was not his only burden. Henry, once a paragon of vigor, had surrendered to the pleasures of the table with near religious zeal. His court's banquets were the stuff of legend, tables groaning under roasted stags, stuffed peacocks, eel pies, and rivers of wine. It wasn't uncommon for the king to consume thousands of calories daily, in an age when moderation was as foreign as a unicorn. By his 50s, Henry likely tipped the scales at over 330 pounds, a weight that made him imposing but also incapable of walking without aid or climbing stairs without wheezing like a broken bellows. His armor, preserved in the Tower of London, boasts a waistline that could double as a castle gate. This obesity wasn't merely cosmetic, it was a death sentence. In the 16th century, physicians had no concept of metabolic diseases, but Henry clearly suffered from several. Modern historians speculate he may have had type 2 diabetes, gout, and possibly hypertension, all exacerbated by his diet and immobility. Gout, in particular, was a relentless torment. Caused by uric acid buildup, it inflamed his joints to the point that walking became a heroic feat. Courtiers described how, on bad days, the king roared in pain, cursing anyone who strayed too close. Imagine a bear-sized man with a festering leg and toes like overstuffed sausages trying to rule a kingdom. Small wonder his mood was less than sunny. His mental state didn't help. Henry was never the picture of stability. After all, this was the man who beheaded 2 wives and broke with the Catholic Church because the Pope wouldn't grant him a divorce, But in his final years, his temperament grew even more volatile. Constant pain, immobility, and frustration with a failing body turned him into a ticking time bomb. Courtiers learned to tiptoe around him, literally and figuratively. A bad day could mean a one-way trip to the scaffold for someone who merely looked at him wrong. Yet, there were moments of vulnerability. It's said that Henry, in private, wept over his decline, aware that the man he once was had vanished. As the years wore on, Henry's health plummeted further. By 1546, he could barely move without a cane or, at times, a special chair carried by servants like a mobile throne. The court, ever a hotbed of intrigue, began preparing for the inevitable. Whispers of succession swirled. Who would inherit the throne? His 9-year-old son, Edward? Or would nobles seize the power vacuum? Henry, aware of these plots, clung to life with the same stubbornness he'd ruled with. But his body had other plans. In the final months of 1546, Henry's symptoms worsened. Fevers plagued him, likely from recurrent leg infections. Swelling, known as edema, suggested failing kidneys or heart, though 16th-century physicians had no means to diagnose it accurately. What we do know is that the king was perpetually exhausted, swinging between feverish delirium and lucid moments where he barked orders with his old authority. His physicians, desperate to keep him alive, or at least avoid blame for his death, resorted to increasingly bizarre remedies. They administered potions laced with herbs and heavy metals, likely hastening his decline. In an era where medicine was more art than science, treatments often proved deadlier than the ailments. The winter of 1546–47 was brutal. Confined to his chamber at Whitehall, Henry could scarcely rise from bed. His sixth wife, Catherine Parr, a woman who'd mastered navigating his stormy moods with diplomatic finesse, stayed by his side, managing the court and preserving some shred of royal dignity. But even Catherine, with all her patience, couldn't ignore the stench from Henry's leg, described by chroniclers as unbearable. The Ulcer's bandages required constant changing, and the servants tasked with this deserve a posthumous medal for bravery. As January progressed, the end loomed. Henry, ever a man of faith, albeit on his own terms, began preparing for death. He ordered masses said for his soul, an ironic gesture for a man who'd broken with Rome to found his own church. He dictated his will, ensuring his son Edward would inherit the throne with a council to guide him. Yet, even in these final moments, Henry couldn't resist being himself. It's said he ordered an advisor's execution in a paranoid outburst, though the order was never carried out. To the end, he ruled through fear and force. On the night of January 27th, Henry slipped into semi-consciousness. Courtiers gathered around his bed, awaiting the inevitable. Tradition holds he was asked if he wished to confess, but Henry, true to form, mumbled something about speaking to Archbishop Cranmer later. Whether defiance or exhaustion, he fell asleep and never woke. At 2 in the morning on January 28th, Henry VIII drew his final breath. The official cause of death was never recorded. 16th-century doctors weren't big on paperwork, but modern historians suggest a mix of kidney failure, sepsis, and heart failure, all worsened by his obesity and chronic leg infection. The news was kept secret for days, a common Tudor tactic to avoid chaos. When announced, the kingdom mourned, though some courtiers likely sighed in relief. Henry had been a formidable king but an unpredictable tyrant. His legacy, the break with Rome, the dissolution of monasteries, the founding of the Church of England, reshaped history, but his death reminded all that even the mightiest kings are mere flesh and blood. Henry's swollen, decayed body was embalmed and placed in a lead coffin that, chronicles say, barely contained him. It was carried in procession to St. George's Chapel at Windsor, where he was buried beside his third wife, Jane Seymour, the only one to give him a male heir. Even in death, Henry caused trouble. It's said the coffin cracked during transport, leaking bodily fluids, a detail chroniclers relished with horrified fascination. Some even claimed dogs licked the remains, a likely apocryphal image that fits the grotesque end of a larger-than-life figure. The horrible death of Henry VIII was not just a man's end but the close of an era. His reign, brimming with drama, intrigue, and a record number of wives, left England transformed yet divided. His body, ravaged by excess and disease, mirrored the contradictions of his life. A man who sought immortality but succumbed to the limits of flesh. As courtiers prepared for the coronation of Edward VI, a frail boy inheriting an unstable throne, Henry's spectre loomed large. And though the king was gone, his legend, and the memory of that foul-smelling ulcer, would endure for centuries.